Karna was your brother. Your eldest brother.
Long before the Great War would cast its long shadow over the plains of Kurukshetra, before brothers stood as enemies across the battlefield, destiny was quietly sowing its seeds within the royal house of Hastinapur. This story does not begin with the clash of steel or the roar of conch shells, but with the private choices of individuals whose hearts were torn between love and duty, and whose decisions would alter the course of Dharma itself. For generations, the Kuru dynasty had ruled the fertile lands of northern Bharatavarsha, their capital of Hastinapur, rising proud along the sacred banks of the Ganga. Yet beneath this grandeur lay a burden, an inheritance of impossible vows and hidden sorrow that would echo down the corridors of time like the fading toll of a struck bell. Among all the princes of this line, none would embody both nobility and tragedy so completely as the child born of a mortal king and a river goddess. Devavrata, son of Shantanu and Ganga, came into the world with the strength to humble the gods and the wisdom to unravel the most tangled moral dilemmas. His name, in time, would be replaced by one even more legendary, Bhishma, the terrible vow. In the early days of his reign, Shantanu ruled with compassion and honor. The people adored him, and the gods favored his house. His union with Ganga had brought forth 8 sons, though fate claimed 7 of them at birth, returning them to the river's depths. Only Devavrata survived to grow into a warrior of unmatched skill, trained by the greatest masters and destined, it seemed, for an unchallenged throne. But the heart is a wild thing. Even the wisest ruler cannot dictate where love will strike. It was during a hunt along the banks of the Yamuna that Shantanu beheld Satyavati, the daughter of a humble fisherman, whose beauty struck him like a lightning bolt from a clear sky. Her dark eyes held mysteries, or deep as the rivers she called home, and her presence moved with a grace that belonged to the eternal dance of the cosmos. Shantanu's desire was immediate and absolute. Yet when he approached her father to ask for her hand, he found himself confronted by a demand that split his heart in two. The fisherman, simple in station but shrewd in mind, spoke plainly. "Great king, my daughter is worthy of any throne, but if she is to become your queen, her children must inherit your crown. I will not see her sons made lesser to any other." This condition struck Shantanu like a spear of grief. How could he strip Devavrata, his beloved son, born of a divine union, of the birthright he had earned by both lineage and virtue? Yet how could he abandon a love that had awakened in him a happiness he thought forever lost? Torn and heartsick, the king withdrew to his palace, where his sorrow grew so deep that even the flowers in his gardens seemed to droop in silent sympathy. It did not escape Devavrata's notice. Alarmed by his father's decline, the young prince pressed the elders until at last the truth came out. In that moment, the weight of an impossible choice settled upon his shoulders, heavy as a mountain. Before him lay the man who had given him life, and a duty to a kingdom that spanned generations. One could not be honored without sacrificing the other. What Devavrata chose next would become legend. An act so selfless that it would be told for ages as the pinnacle of sacrifice. He sought out the fisherman and, before the witness of gods and men, made a vow that would define him forever. First, he renounced all claim to the throne, declaring that Satyavati's sons alone would rule after Shantanu's passing. But the fisherman, wary of the ambitions that could arise in future generations, spoke again. "Mighty prince, what assurance have I that your children will not one day contest this promise?" Without a moment's hesitation, Devavrata made a second, more terrible oath. His voice rang like thunder. "I swear by all that is sacred, by earth and sky, by fire and water, that I shall never wed, never father a child, nor know the joys of family. My line ends with me, so that no descendant of mine will ever threaten the heirs of this house." At those words, the heavens themselves shuddered. A rain of blossoms fell from the sky, and the gods cried out in awe. In that instant, Devavrata became Bhishma, the one who took the terrible vow. His sacrifice won his father's happiness, but condemned him to a lifetime of solitude. Bound forever to serve a throne he could never claim, he embraced his destiny with a serenity that only the truly great possess. After Shantanu's union with Satyavati, joy briefly returned to the halls of Hastinapur. Their marriage brought forth 2 sons, Chitrangada and Vichitravirya, but happiness in the royal house was as fleeting as morning mist. Chitrangada, though courageous and noble, fell young upon the battlefield, leaving the hopes of the dynasty resting upon his younger brother. Vichitravirya, blessed with charm and goodwill, lacked the resolve and steel a sovereign required. Worse still, he died before fathering an heir, plunging the Kuru lineage into perilous uncertainty. In this crisis, Satyavati revealed a secret that would forever alter the fate of the dynasty. Before her marriage to Shantanu, she had borne a son to the sage Parashara, a child named Krishna Dvaipayana, who would later be revered as Vyasa, the compiler of the Vedas and the very chronicler of this tale. Born of a mortal mother and a celestial sage, Vyasa possessed powers that transcended human measure, and by the ancient law of Niyoga, when a king died childless, a kinsman could father children upon the widows to preserve the royal line. Though uncommon, the practice was sanctified by tradition and invoked only when survival demanded it. Summoned by his mother, Vyasa, dark of complexion and formidable in ascetic power, agreed to fulfill this solemn duty. What followed were births that would shape the destiny of the world. When Vyasa approached Ambika, the elder queen, she recoiled in terror at the sight of his unearthly visage. Throughout their union, she kept her eyes tightly shut. In time, she bore a son, blind from birth, named Dhritarashtra, he whose grip would one day hold an empire. Though bereft of sight, the boy was endowed with the strength of 10,000 elephants and an intellect as keen as a honed blade. The younger queen, Ambalika, though she kept her gaze upon the sage, turned pale with dread. Her son was born with skin as ashen as her fear. They named him Pandu, the Pale One, yet what he lacked in colour he made up for in courage and skill. In the years ahead, he would prove a just ruler and a conqueror, whose campaigns carried the Kuru banner to distant realms. Concerned by the omens that clung to these births, Satyavati pleaded with Vyasa to return once more, hoping the final child might be untouched by misfortune. When the moment came, Ambika, still haunted by her earlier terror, could not bring herself to face him again. Instead, she sent her loyal maid in her place. The woman, neither noble nor afraid, greeted Vyasa with dignity and reverence. From their union was born a son dark as midnight, yet radiant with wisdom, Vidura. Though born of a servant, his counsel would one day become the conscience of the kingdom itself. Thus came into the world the 3 pillars of a new generation. Dhritarashtra, strong but blind in both sight and often in judgment. Pandu, the pale prince whose justice and valour would bring renown to his house. Vidura, wise beyond measure, yet barred from the throne by birth. Their origins foretold a future as tangled as the roots of a banyan tree, where blindness could be literal and moral, where strength might conceal fragility, and where truth often sprang from the humblest soil. As the brothers grew, their natures revealed themselves in stark relief. Dhritarashtra, despite his good heart, let affection cloud his judgment. He loved deeply and too easily overlooked folly. Pandu, though younger, emerged as the natural sovereign, respected for his fairness and feared for his military prowess. Vidura, denied a crown by circumstance, became the kingdom's quiet compass. His counsel rarely embraced, but never ignored. Pandu's reign brought prosperity and strength. Under his hand, the Kuru dominion flourished, and his victories expanded its borders. He took 2 wives, Kunti, famed for her beauty and unshakable virtue, and Madri, princess of a distant kingdom whose grace rivaled any goddess. But as so often happens, prosperity bred complacency, and complacency invited calamity. One day, while hunting in the deep forest, Pandu glimpsed a pair of deer locked in tender union. Not knowing they were a sage and his wife disguised in animal form, he loosed an arrow that would set in motion a curse more cruel than any battlefield wound. As the dying sage struggled for breath, his final words struck like a thunderclap. "As you have torn me from life in my moment of love, so shall death find you if ever you approach your wives in desire." The curse fell upon Pandu, the pale prince, with the force of a mortal blow. A ruler without heirs was no true king, and the one solace he had yearned for most was now forbidden under penalty of death. Crushed by despair, Pandu renounced his throne in favor of his elder brother Dhritarashtra and withdrew to the wilderness, taking his queens with him. There, amid the silent grandeur of the Himalayan foothills, he sought through penance and meditation some deliverance from the doom that had been laid upon him. But the gods were not yet finished with the house of Kuru. Kunti, Pandu's first wife, held a secret that would one day redeem their line. In her youth, while serving her family, she had shown such devotion to the sage Durvasa that he blessed her with a miraculous boon, a sacred mantra by which any god could be summoned to grant her a child. In innocent curiosity, Kunti had once tested this power, calling upon Surya, the radiant god of the sun. He appeared before her in all his blazing majesty. Though she protested that she had not meant to invoke him in truth, the god declared that a divine boon could not be recalled. Thus was born a child of celestial origin, resplendent and invulnerable, his body adorned from birth with golden armor and earrings fused to his flesh. Knowing that bearing an illegitimate son would bring shame upon her house, Kunti laid the infant in a reed basket and set him afloat upon the river, praying for his safety. He was discovered by a humble charioteer, Adiratha, and his wife Radha, who named him Karna, the one adorned with earrings. Years later, as Pandu languished under the weight of his curse and the kingdom's survival hung in balance, Untai revealed her secret. With Pandu's blessing, she invoked her divine gift to summon gods who would father sons in his stead, children who would inherit the might of their heavenly sires, while remaining his in the eyes of law and lineage. First came Yudhishthira, born of Dharma himself, the god of justice, destined to embody righteousness, yet forever burdened by the agony of absolute moral choice. Next was Bhima, son of Vayu, lord of the wind, whose tempestuous strength revealed itself even in infancy. Once, when the child slipped from his mother's arms and fell onto jagged stone, the rock shattered while he remained unhurt, laughing at the ruin he had wrought. The third was Arjuna, child of Indra, king of the gods and master of thunder. From his birth, it was clear he was marked for martial greatness, his divine father's skill with celestial weapons already smouldering within him. Yet Arjuna would also inherit Indra's complex spirit, a mingling of radiant confidence and shadowed doubt. Marjorie, Pandu's younger queen, watched her co-wife's miraculous sons and longed for the same blessing. In a moment of generosity that Kunti would later come to regret, she shared the sacred mantra. Marjorie invoked the Ashwins, the divine twin physicians, and soon bore twin sons, Nakula, whose beauty rivaled the dawn, and Sahadeva, quiet and wise beyond his years. These 5 children, conceived of gods yet raised as brothers in exile, grew up learning both the arts of war and the deeper lessons of Dharma that only suffering can teach. Though Pandu was barred from the arms of his wives, he found in their children a joy that transcended earthly pleasure. Yet even the most disciplined spirit can waver beneath the weight of longing. One dawn, as the sun poured its golden light across the mountain sanctuary, Pandu beheld Madri tending the sacred fire. Her grace struck him afresh, stirring a desire that drowned all caution. In that fragile instant, the ancient curse awoke and struck, Death claimed Pandu as he embraced the woman he loved, leaving Madri to carry the unbearable guilt of being both cherished and accursed. Unable to endure her sorrow, Madri chose to ascend the funeral pyre beside her husband, entrusting her twin sons to Kunti's care. Thus the 5 Pandava brothers, Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula and Sahadeva, lost both parents in a single day, inheriting not only celestial lineage, but also the bitter knowledge that even the purest love can destroy. Meanwhile, in Hastinapur, Dhritarashtra ruled as regent, his own ambitions tempered by the expectation that Pandu would one day return. His queen, Gandhari, had chosen to blindfold herself forever in solidarity with her husband, a gesture both of devotion and of the moral blindness that would haunt their line. When Gandhari became pregnant, envy of Kunti's divine offspring gnawed at her. She prayed for a miracle, but her blessing took a strange form. After 2 years of unnatural gestation, she finally gave birth, not to a child, but to a dense mass of flesh. Summoned to council, Vyasa divided this shapeless mass into 101 pieces, placed in vessels of clarified butter. Each fragment slowly grew into a child. Thus were born Gandhari's 100 sons and a single daughter, the Kauravas, led by their eldest, Duryodhana, his very name meaning hard to conquer. When news reached Hastinapur of Pandu's death, Bhishma himself journeyed into the forest to retrieve the widows and their children. As he beheld the 5 boys, Yudhishthira with truth in his eyes, Bhima crackling with latent power, Arjuna with the focus of a born archer, and the luminous twins, he felt both pride and foreboding. These sons of gods walked among mortals, but their divine blood could not shield them from human envy. As the procession approached the city gates, citizens lined the roads, casting flowers and singing blessings. But high above, watching from a shadowed balcony, Duryodhana's gaze grew heavy with resentment, a darkness that would one day engulf the world itself. In the halls of Hastinapur, the stage was quietly set for a drama that would span generations. Here, children who would one day become heroes and villains played side by side, unaware that their innocent games were rehearsals for conflicts destined to shake the very pillars of Dharma. The blind king, Dhritarashtra, loved all the children as his own, yet his sightless gaze extended beyond the physical. He could not perceive how his partiality toward his sons nurtured the seeds of future ruin. Only Vidura, ever watchful and wise, observed with growing dread the patterns taking shape, like storm clouds gathering on a tranquil horizon. The Pandavas, marked by their celestial birthright, carried within them the stamp of destiny. In contrast, the Kauravas, born not of divine blessing but of strange, prolonged magic, were driven by ambitions untethered by conscience. Between them, the idea of righteousness itself began to blur, becoming a labyrinth of conflicting duties, each choice leading to consequences no mortal foresight could unravel. Thus were sown the seeds of the Great War, a conflict born in a palace where blind affection battled clear judgment, where celestial heritage contended with all too human hunger for power, and where the meaning of virtue would be tested in flames that could either purify or consume everything in their path. As the children grew, the first cracks in the dynasty's foundation began to appear. The return to Hastinapur marked not merely a homecoming, but the beginning of a new, troubled chapter. Within the palace walls, the 5 sons of gods were raised alongside their 100 cousins. Their childhood was a delicate blend of play and preparation, innocence and impending fate. Bhishma, the elder statesman, took it upon himself to oversee their education. Under his guidance, the palace transformed into a vast academy where masters from across the known world gathered to share their knowledge. In those marble corridors, every discipline, arts of peace and of war, was taught with the same fervor. The difference between the cousins soon became impossible to ignore. Yudhishthira absorbed lessons in justice and governance with such intensity, it seemed the very concept of Dharma pulsed in his blood. Bhima's strength left shattered practice weapons and bruised sparring partners in his wake. Arjuna's focus during archery drills was so complete he seemed to vanish into a realm where only the bow and the target existed. The twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, each revealed gifts worthy of their divine heritage. Nakula possessed an uncanny bond with horses, able to calm and guide them with little more than a glance. Sahadeva demonstrated a talent for perceiving hidden truths. He often knew things no teacher had spoken aloud. Among the Kauravas, Duryodhana soon rose as their leader, not through celestial gifts, but through sheer force of will. His strength rivaled Bhima's, achieved through relentless discipline rather than divine inheritance. More than any weapon, it was his charisma, his ability to command loyalty that made him formidable. Yet every triumph felt overshadowed by the effortless brilliance of the Pandavas. Where his achievements came through sweat and sacrifice, his cousins seemed to gather glory as naturally as drawing breath. With each passing season, resentment grew, roots sinking deep in the fertile soil of envy. The first great teacher to arrive was Kripacharya, a master of arms discovered as an infant among river reeds. His knowledge of warfare was vast, but it was his insight into character that made him invaluable. Under his instruction, the princes learned not only the how of combat, but the when and why. Yet it was Dronacharya whose arrival transformed their training forever. Born of a sacred rite, Drona's mastery of weapons was legendary, but he carried with him a hidden grievance. In his youth, he had been the friend of Drupada, a prince who once promised him half his kingdom. Years later, when Drupada became king, he dismissed Drona with contempt, humiliating a man who had trusted him as a brother. Determined to reclaim his honor and provide for his family, Drona came to Hastinapur, seeking a place as weapons instructor. His demonstration of skill was so astonishing that Bhishma appointed him master of all the royal children on the spot. But beneath this honor lay Drona's secret aim, to raise students who could one day help him humble his old enemy. Under his demanding eye, the young warrior's abilities blossomed. Yudhishthira became a master of the spear. Bhima wielded the mace with an unmatched ferocity that left the training ground trembling. The twins grew expert with sword and shield, their coordination a thing of beauty. But it was Arjuna who captured Drona's admiration and his favoritism. The boy's devotion was absolute. He practiced in darkness to perfect shooting by sound alone. His discipline transcended talent, becoming something closer to a sacred calling. In time, Drona entrusted him with secrets of warfare he shared with no other pupil. Knowledge of celestial weapons capable of laying waste to entire armies. This special attention did not pass unnoticed. Duryodhana, already wounded by the gulf between himself and the Pandavas, saw in this favoritism one more reason to believe fate itself conspired against him. The seeds of jealousy, planted at birth, had begun to sprout into something darker. The first true fracture came during what should have been a celebration. Drona arranged a grand tournament to display the students' skill. All of Hastinapur was invited, nobles, citizens, and warriors alike. The arena gleamed with silken banners and echoed with anticipation. One by one, the princes demonstrated their mastery. Yudhishthira's spearwork earned respectful nods from seasoned veterans. Bhima's exhibition of the mace left the crowd gasping as the earth itself seemed to quake under his blows. But when Arjuna stepped forward, the arena fell to awed silence. His performance transcended mere technique. He split arrows in mid-flight, struck unseen targets, and demonstrated feats that seemed to defy the laws of the world. When he finally lowered his bow, the arena erupted in thunderous applause. It appeared Arjuna had not only won the tournament, but captured every heart in attendance. Then, from the far end of the arena, came the low thunder of chariot wheels. Dust rose as a figure emerged, tall, radiant, and clad in armor that shimmered like molten gold. His earrings caught the sunlight like tiny captured suns. In that moment, everyone knew. The story of the sons of gods was far from complete, and the rivalries that would consume a kingdom were only just beginning. This was the boy abandoned in infancy and raised by a humble charioteer, his true lineage hidden even from himself. Clad in shining armor and crowned with confidence that bordered on defiance, he stepped boldly into the arena. With a voice that carried across the stunned gathering, he proclaimed his intent to equal and surpass every feat the master archer had displayed moments before. A ripple of shock passed through the spectators. Who was this stranger daring to challenge a prince of royal blood, the heir whose skill they had just hailed as unmatched? Yet challenge he did, and to the astonishment of all, the newcomer matched Arjuna arrow for arrow. Every seemingly impossible demonstration of precision was met with a flawless response. The two young warriors faced one another across the arena, reflections of each other in power and purpose. It was then that Kripacharya, officiating the tournament, spoke the question that would echo through history. "Young man," he called, his voice grave, "your mastery is evident to all. But this contest is reserved for princes. Tell us, what is your lineage? Under whose patronage do you stand? By what right do you claim equality with the heirs of Hastinapur?" The words struck the challenger like a blow. In the hour of his triumph, he was reminded of the humble cradle from which he had come. The admiration of the crowd turned to murmurs of doubt. He stood alone under 1,000 eyes, his accomplishments suddenly diminished by the stigma of unknown birth. At that moment, Duryodhana made a choice that would alter the fate of the realm. Rising from his seat among the royal family, he descended into the arena. Placing a hand on the young warrior's shoulder, he declared in a voice that rang to the farthest stands, "If royal rank is the price of entry, then let none say this man is unworthy. I name him King of Anger, a sovereign in his own rig, Shti, and my friend." It was a gesture as grand as it was calculated. In a single stroke, Duryodhana not only solved the immediate dilemma, but also won for himself an ally whose talent rivaled Arjuna's. By recognizing merit over birth, he displayed a vision that appealed to many who felt overlooked by tradition. The newly crowned king fell to one knee, his voice thick with emotion. "My lord, you have given me more than a kingdom. You have granted me dignity. My life is yours to command, and I will never forget this debt." So began a friendship forged in mutual need, a bond that would prove stronger than any ties of blood. For Karna, as the world would come to know him, this moment offered something he had never possessed, a place where his worth mattered more than the accident of his birth. Yet this triumph planted seeds of discord that no harvest could contain. Arjuna, who had stood moments before in unrivaled glory, now faced a challenger whose prowess was equal. Bhima, ever the protector of his brothers, saw in Karna's elevation a threat to their standing. Even Yudhishthira, who understood the justice of Duryodhana's act, could not ignore the shift in balance that it heralded. As the tournament ended, the royal children returned to the palace, changed. The innocent camaraderie of childhood had given way to something darker. Alliances were formed, resentments crystallized, and the first moves of a game that would consume them all had been played. In the days that followed, these undercurrents surfaced in countless subtle ways. Training became competitive rather than cooperative. Meals were no longer marked by laughter, but by careful silences and guarded words. The atmosphere itself seemed charged with a tension no one dared name aloud. Dronacharya observed it all and decided the time had come to reveal his true purpose. Summoning his students, he spoke plainly. "For you, the years of training, I require a gift, tribute to repay my debt of humiliation. You will march upon Panchala and bring its king to me, alive. This expedition became their first true test outside the controlled confines of training. Eager to prove themselves, Duryodhana led the Kauravas in the initial assault, but their enthusiasm was no match for the seasoned defenders of Panchala. Beaten back, the sons of Dhritarashtra tasted bitter failure. Then the Pandavas entered the fray. Their celestial inheritance revealed itself in every blow. Arjuna's arrows struck with unerring precision. Bhima's mace cleared paths through the enemy ranks. Yudhishthira directed the attack with a strategist's mind. By dusk, they had accomplished what their cousins could not, the capture of Drupada, king of Panchala. This victory only deepened the gulf. Duryodhana's humiliation curdled into enduring resentment. Yet even this was but a prelude to more perilous turns. When Drupada was led in chains before his former friend, Drona's words were calm but laced with quiet vengeance. Do you remember the boy you once called your brother? Now I return half your kingdom, as you should have done for me. We are equals at last. The blow landed as intended. The shamed monarch accepted his diminished realm, but the hatred in his eyes promised the reckoning had only begun. Released, Drupada retreated to his capital, determined to raise a child who would avenge his disgrace. In time, his prayers were answered. From a sacrificial fire emerged two children, Drishtadyumna, born to slay Drona himself, and Draupadi, a daughter whose beauty and destiny would entwine with every thread of this unfolding saga. But all that lay ahead. For now, the young princes returned to Hastinapur. Their education was complete, but their relationships were irrevocably altered. The tournament had revealed not only their talents, but their rivalries. The campaign against Panchala had shown that strength and victory could sow seeds of hatred as easily as loyalty. In the Pal, Ace, Dhritarashtra grappled with these developments. His love for his sons blinded him to their flaws, but he could not deny the Pandavas' growing renown. The people admired their deeds. Even the nobility began to speak of Yudhishthira as the natural heir. This realization filled the blind king with dread. Gandhari, though more clear-eyed, knew how perilous these divisions could become, yet her counsel fell on ears deafened by paternal pride. Outside the palace walls, the realm began to mirror the family's fracture. Some pledged loyalty to the Pandavas, inspired by their virtue. Others rallied behind Duryodhana, drawn by his charisma and defiance of old hierarchies. As the cousins grew to manhood, the question of succession loomed ever larger. By custom, the throne should pass to the eldest, but was that Yudhishthira or Duryodhana? And in an age hungry for capable leaders, did lineage matter more than merit? The childhood games had ended. Now began the true contest for the soul of the Kuru dynasty. And in the kingdom of Panchala, a summons was issued that would draw every warrior of renown. A Swayamvara for Draupadi, the fire-born princess. The challenge was as daunting as the prize was glorious. A colossal bow no ordinary man could string, and a target so distant that only the greatest archer could hope to strike it. Word spread like wildfire, carried to every palace and hermitage. To the Pandavas, it was both opportunity and test. With their position in Hastinapur growing precarious, they chose to attend not as princes, but in the guise of wandering Brahmins. Accompanied by Kunti, they journeyed on foot, sleeping beneath the stars and relying on the kindness of villagers. In these humble travels, they learned more of the people they would one day rule than any royal tutor could have taught. They met sages whose wisdom outshone kingdoms, farmers who wrestled life from unyielding soil, and mendicants who measured wealth in spiritual clarity rather than coin. One evening, beneath a canopy of stars, they encountered the sage Vyasa, their ancestor, the cosmic chronicler. Though they did not grasp the full measure of his identity, his words left an imprint on their hearts. Dharma is no rigid law, he told them quietly. It is a living current, ever shifting. Sometimes, the path that seems least righteous to others is the one truest to the spirit of righteousness itself. The greatest warriors, the sage had told them, are not those who never struggle with moral dilemmas, but those who meet them with courage and clarity, accepting the consequences of their choices while never losing sight of their purpose. None of them could have guessed how prophetic those words would prove, but for the moment they were simply young men on an adventure, their spirits buoyed by newfound love and the promise of a destiny that still seemed distant. When they at last reached the capital of Panchala, the city's splendor took their breath away. Every avenue thronged with nobles, pilgrims, and warriors who had gathered for Draupadi's Swayamvara. Vast pavilions and viewing galleries had been raised to accommodate the thousands who came to witness the event. The world's mightiest kings and renowned fighters had assembled, each convinced he would triumph in the impossible challenge. Disguised as humble Brahmins, the Pandavas took lodging among the holy men, blending into the crowds as they studied their rivals and the colossal bull that awaited any suitor. To many, the task seemed absurd, requiring not only strength enough to string the massive weapon, but also the precision to hit a distant, barely visible target. But Arjuna's sharp eyes saw more than spectacle. He studied every detail: the bow's curvature, the tension of its string, the elevation of the target. What others saw as an insurmountable feat, he recognized as a test of technique and calm more than brute force. At dawn, the arena filled with a sea of humanity. Silken banners fluttered in the warm breeze. Musicians played solemn hymns as Draupadi herself emerged. Her beauty surpassed every rumor. Her dark, searching gaze and serene composure hinted at depths few could fathom. One by one, the assembled warriors stepped forward. Some could not lift the bow, others strained to string it, only to fail. Few managed to draw the string but sent their arrows wide of the mark. As each attempt ended in defeat, a restless murmur grew among the spectators. Perhaps no one would succeed. Perhaps this was all a ruse. Then Arjuna rose. In the guise of a Brahmin, he moved with quiet assurance to the center of the arena. Gasps rippled through the audience. How could a holy man presume to enter such a contest? Voices cried out in protest, claiming the challenge was for Kshatriyas alone. But Draupadi, watching closely, lifted her hand. Something in this stranger's demeanor, some hidden grace, compelled her to grant him his chance. Arjuna bowed to the bow itself, as if greeting an old friend. With no flourish or hesitation, he bent the massive weapon and strung it in a single, fluid motion. A heartbeat later, the arrow flew, striking the distant target with unerring accuracy. The arena erupted in chaos, astonishment, outrage, and acclaim colliding in a single roar. Draupadi stepped down from her platform. With steady hands, she draped the victory garland around Arjuna's neck, claiming him as her husband. But their triumph ignited fury among the defeated suitors. Swords were drawn. A ring of armed men advanced upon the unarmed Brahmin and his bride. In that moment, the other Pandavas revealed themselves. Bhima's great strength scattered their attackers like dry leaves in a gale. The twins fought with seamless coordination, while Yudhishthira's calm voice organized their defense with tactical brilliance no Brahmin could possess. When the dust settled, the disguised brothers departed with Draupadi. Behind them, the arena buzzed with speculation and dawning suspicion. One observer, however, required no explanation. From the royal dais, Krishna watched it all with a knowing smile. His divine vision pierced their disguises, recognizing not just their faces, but the destiny that bound them. He said nothing. His calm expression suggested he understood the deeper currents shaping this moment. On the road back to their modest quarters, the brothers spoke with Draupadi. They discovered her mind to be as sharp as her beauty, her curiosity matched by her resolve. She accepted their humble disguise without fear, sensing instinctively that these men were more than they appeared. But it was when they arrived home that the day's strangest event unfolded. As was custom, Arjuna called out to their mother, Kunti, "Mother, we have brought back a great prize." Without looking up from her work, she answered in the distracted tone of a mother accustomed to boys returning with curiosities. "Whatever it is, share it equally among yourselves." Her words fell into silence. Tradition made them binding. But how could 5 brothers share a wife? Puzzled and uneasy, they remembered stories of ancient times when such unions were not unknown. When Draupadi heard of the dilemma, she listened gravely, then nodded as if recognizing something beyond mortal comprehension. At that moment, Vyasa appeared, as he so often did when fate required guidance. He explained that in a previous life, Draupadi had prayed to Shiva for a husband, repeating her wish 5 times. The god, in his wisdom, had granted her prayer literally. She would indeed have 5 husbands, each representing a different facet of the ideal man she had longed for. Her marriage to the Pandavas was no accident, but destiny's design, uniting divine qualities into a single house, bound by a woman who would be their anchor. The wedding was solemnized under strict vows. Each brother would spend a year as Draupadi's husband, treating her as sister-in-law during the other's time. Any breach of this rule would mean exile. This extraordinary union brought them more than personal joy. With Panchala's alliance, the Pandavas were no longer exiles but a formidable force. Drupada embraced them as allies, recognizing in them the answer to his prayers for vengeance and renewal. Perhaps most crucial of all, Krishna's friendship blossomed into something profound. Wise beyond measure, yet approachable, he became their confidant and guide. His understanding of the hidden threads of destiny surpassed any other. Under Krishna's counsel, the brothers began to glimpse their roles in a design far larger than dynasties. Their divine birthright carried obligations to Dharma itself. For the first time, they understood that the trials awaiting them were more than personal tests. They were cosmic reckonings. Back in Hastinapur, the news of their marriage struck like a thunderclap. The 5 brothers who had left as dependents returned as allies of Panchala, their power doubled by love and lineage. Dhritarashtra felt torn between relief and dread. He loved his nephews sincerely, but he could no longer ignore the threat they posed to his own sons. Gandhari, ever wise, warned that these resentments, if left unresolved, would end in ruin. But her counsel struggled against the tides of pride and fear. Duryodhana's humiliation curdled into burning resentment. He had watched the Pandavas surpass him in every contest. Now they returned with Krishna's favor and a wife whose alliance elevated them beyond challenge. It was Krishna who proposed a truce, one last attempt to avert disaster. He suggested dividing the kingdom. The Pandavas would receive a barren tract called Khandava Prastha, broken lands ravaged by neglect. The Kauravas would retain Hastinapur's riches. To many, it seemed a final insult, exile cloaked as compromise. But Krishna saw further. He knew the brothers' gifts would transform wasteland into splendor. Reluctantly, all agreed, and thus the Pandavas began anew. With celestial resolve, they remade Khandavaprastha into Indraprastha, city of the god Indra, a place of wonder. Temples, halls, and gardens rose from ruin. Tice was dispensed without fear or favor. Trade, learning, and the arts flourished. At its heart stood the Palace of Illusions, designed by Maya, master architect of the demons. Walls that shimmered like air, pools that were solid floors, every detail a testament to the power of vision. Word spread far and wide of a city where Dharma guided every act. Warriors came to pledge loyalty, scholars came to teach, the poor came to thrive. At last, Yudhishthira resolved to perform the Rajasuya sacrifice, an ancient rite that would declare him emperor of the known world. And while the Pandavas prepared for triumph, the enmity in Hastinapur deepened, quiet as a serpent coiled to strike. The Rajasuya ceremony demanded that every king and prince acknowledge Yudhishthira's supremacy or openly declare themselves his enemy. Even the invitations carried to every corner of the known world were less threats than proclamations of righteous triumph. The responses revealed how far the Pandavas' fame had spread. One after another, rulers arrived in Indraprastha bearing tribute, compelled as much by admiration as by duty. For months, the city overflowed with scholars, priests, warriors, and artists. The rituals were spectacles of wealth and sacred power, but amid the celebrations, the seeds of disaster sprouted quietly. Among the honored guests were Dhritarashtra's sons. Though they came under pretense of kinship, their hearts seethed with resentment. For Duryodhana, his first glimpse of Indraprastha was a wound that would never heal. The city was more splendid than any he had imagined. Its justice was evident in every marketplace, its prosperity carved into every street. But it was the palace of illusions that undid him completely. Within those halls, his senses betrayed him. Once, mistaking a crystal floor for water, he gathered his robes in embarrassment. Another time, he walked directly into an invisible wall. Each mishap seemed trivial in isolation, but together they formed a pattern of humiliation he could neither ignore nor forgive. The final disgrace came when, stepping where he believed solid ground lay, he plunged waist-deep into an unseen pool. He emerged dripping, surrounded by laughter, the memory of Draupadi's voice, whether real or imagined, cut deepest of all, the blind begetting the blind. That moment shattered the last restraint on his pride. Their return to Hastinapur was grim and silent. Every mile widened the chasm between the Kauravas and their cousins. Dhritarashtra tried to soothe his son's bruised ego, but each placation only stoked Duryodhana's rage. Gandhari's wise counsel fell on ears deafened by humiliation. Shakuni, ever watchful, saw his chance. His own grudge, rooted in his sister's forced marriage, merged with Duryodhana's fury. Together, they devised a plan as simple as it was ruinous. Invite the Pandavas to a friendly game of dice. Shakuni's mastery of the dice bordered on the supernatural. His gaming pieces obeyed not the laws of chance, but his will alone. When the invitation arrived, it appeared as a gesture of goodwill, an olive branch extended across a bloodied divide. Yudhishthira's brothers sensed the trap, but their elder's fatal flaw was his inability to refuse any contest of skill. Krishna's warnings were measured and grave. He spoke of cycles completing themselves, of righteousness tested in fire. But he made one truth clear: the choice was theirs alone. And so the stage was set for the most fateful game in history. The Pandavas arrived, welcomed with all the honors due to visiting royalty. The hall glowed with opulence, yet beneath the gilded surface lay an unease only the keenest observers could feel. Yudhishthira took his place across from Shakuni, unaware that this contest was never meant to be fair. The early rounds seemed harmless, small stakes won and lost in turn. But gradually, Shakuni raised the wagers. Yudhishthira's compulsion grew, as did the crowd's fascination. He lost gold, then jewels, then his chariots and weapons. His brother's warnings were met with grim silence. When even his wealth was exhausted, he wagered the very city he had built, Indraprastha, that testament to his vision. When that too was lost, he staked their kingdom itself. One by one, each throw of the dice stripped him of everything. In the end, he bet his brothers, the warriors whose loyalty had never wavered. They were lost too, and still the fever held him. Finally, Shakuni whispered what no decent man should ever have spoken. "You have but one possession left, your queen." Gasps swept the hall. Even the courtiers, accustomed to intrigue, recoiled. But Yudhishthira, trapped in his obsession, agreed. When the dice fell, predictably, inevitably, he lost the last of all he cherished. Draupadi, born of fire, was summoned to the hall. When she refused, arguing that a man who had lost himself had no right to stake her, her words were ignored. Dushasana dragged her by her hair into the assembly. She came clad in a single garment, caught unprepared in her seclusion. Many averted their gaze. None dared intervene. The final outrage came when Duryodhana commanded that she be disrobed as a spectacle of their triumph. With her voice steady, Draupadi called out, "Krishna, protector of the righteous, save me." As Dushasana pulled, the fabric renewed itself endlessly. He tugged until he collapsed, exhausted, while she remained untouched, wrapped in Krishna's grace. Rising, she fixed her gaze on every man present. "You call yourselves noble," she said, "yet you sat in silence while this crime unfolded. I swear upon the gods, I will not bind my hair again until it is washed in the blood of this wretch who seized it." Her words were prophecy. At last, even Dhritarashtra could bear no more. The elders urged restraint, and the sentence was commuted to exile. 12 years in the wilderness, one more in disguise. If discovered during the final year, the term would begin anew. The brothers accepted this with the dignity that had always defined them, but the oath in Draupadi's voice remained, an unbroken vow. As they prepared to leave, Kunti and Draupadi chose to go with them, preferring hardship to dishonor. Yet before their departure, Kunti sent for Karna. In private, she revealed the truth he had never known. He was her firstborn. Her plea was simple: come back to your brothers. End this war before it begins. Karna's voice was low when he answered, "Mother, you gave me life, but Duryodhana gave me honor. You offer me a crown, but I have already given my loyalty." Still, he promised her that 4 of her sons would survive him. Only Arjuna, his rival since that first tournament, he would not spare. When the Pandavas left, their path stretched into an uncertain future. They carried with them not only loss, but a fierce resolve, and the knowledge that destiny would not be denied forever. 13 years passed, years of hardship, meditation, and preparation. When at last they returned, free men once more, they came to reclaim all that had been stolen, but their appeals were met with mockery. It was then that Krishna stepped forward, no longer merely a counselor, but a mediator standing between 2 worlds. The last act of the cosmic drama had begun. The time for reconciliation had passed, and the road ahead would be paved with sacrifice. Krishna's journey back to the capital was undertaken with little expectation of peace. More than any man present, he understood that the forces now in motion had passed beyond diplomacy's reach. Yet standing in the great hall, radiant with the quiet authority of his divine nature, he delivered an offer so modest no reasonable man could refuse. "Grant the Pandavas but 5 villages," he said, his voice echoing in the hush. "One for each brother. Let them live with dignity, and keep the rest of the realm as you wish." Silence followed. Then, in a tone chilled by arrogance, Duryodhana gave his reply. "I will not yield them so much land as would fit the point of a needle." Even among his allies, there were gasps of astonishment. The last bridge to reconciliation collapsed in that moment, and all present felt it. But Krishna had not come only to negotiate. He had come to reveal the true scale of what was unfolding. Rising to his full height, he spoke in words that rang with the power of universal law. "This is no petty quarrel. You stand upon the threshold of a war between Dharma and Dharma, between order and ruin." And then, before their eyes, his form began to change. The familiar human guise dissolved. In its place blazed a vision beyond mortal comprehension, the Virat Rupa, the cosmic form that contained all things, creation and destruction, time and eternity, every birth and every death. Courtiers fell trembling to the floor. Some glimpsed their own deaths upon the battlefield. Others saw the futility of all ambition measured against the infinite. For a heartbeat, Duryodhana's bravado faltered, but the moment passed and pride reclaimed him. When Krishna resumed his human shape, his message remained etched in every heart. The gods had chosen their side. Those who stood against Dharma would face a reckoning that transcended the world itself. With all hope of compromise extinguished, both sides began their final preparations. This was no ordinary feud. Kings and champions from across the earth pledged their banners. Old alliances crumbled and new ones rose in their place. Even families were divided as duty pulled sons against fathers, brothers against brothers. Krishna declared he would not bear arms, but would aid whichever side valued him more. Offered a choice between Krishna's vast army and Krishna's counsel alone, Arjuna chose the counsel. Duryodhana, blind to true worth, claimed the legions. The armies converged on Kurukshetra, a sacred plain soon to be drenched in blood. Elephants trumpeted, horses stamped, the clamour of weapons rose. The earth itself groaned under the weight of the gathered hosts. At last, the day came. Two immense forces arrayed themselves in serried ranks, banners snapping in the dawn. Among the elders of the field stood Bhishma, bound by his oath to serve the throne, though his sympathies lay with the Pandavas. Drona, the master who had taught both sides, stood beside him, grimly resolved. Karna, the abandoned prince whose destiny had been bound to Arjuna since that first tournament, took his place, determined to honor the loyalty Duryodhana had shown him. The Pandavas stood opposite, not merely as claimants to a throne, but as symbols of a principle that could not be extinguished. Yet when Arjuna looked across the plain, he saw not faceless enemies, but revered teachers, cherished cousins, and companions of his youth. The weight of what must be done crushed him. "This is no victory," he whispered, sinking to his chariot floor. "What triumph could justify the slaughter of those I love?" It was then that Krishna began to speak. His words became the Bhagavad Gita, the song of the divine, an unparalleled discourse on duty, fate, and the eternal nature of the soul. "Your grief is misplaced," Krishna said with infinite calm. "The wise mourn neither the living nor the dead. Just as the body casts aside worn garments, so does the soul abandon one form for another." Arjuna listened, and slowly his despair became understanding. His duty was not his own desire, but a role woven into the fabric of existence itself. Krishna revealed the soul's immortality, the futility of clinging to results, and the necessity of action performed in surrender to the divine. At last, to dispel the last of doubt, Krishna showed him again the cosmic form, a vision so vast it contained all worlds. When it faded, Arjuna rose, his purpose renewed. "I will fight," he said quietly, lifting his bow, "and leave the fruits to you." The conch shells sounded. The war began. 18 days of battle would follow, each day a descent deeper into darkness. On the first day, ancient codes still governed the field. Warriors met equals, hostilities ceased at dusk, and the wounded were honored. But the pressures of vengeance and loss soon eroded all restraint. By the 10th day, Bhishma himself fell, pierced not by might, but by a stratagem that used his own virtue against him. Even as he lay dying, he blessed those who would soon end the world he had defended. Drona succeeded him. His brilliance in war brought carnage unimaginable. To stop him, the Pandavas resorted to deception, convincing him his beloved son was slain. When Drona laid down his arms in grief, he was struck down in violation of every code of honor. Even among victors, shame spread like a stain. Then came the 13th day, when Abhimanyu, Arjuna's son, was trapped and butchered by 7 of the mightiest warriors in a massacre without precedent. His death transformed Arjuna's sorrow into an unquenchable wrath. On the night of the 14th day, Ghatotkachar, Bhima's giant son, unleashed havoc upon the Kauravas. To stop him, Karna was forced to expend the divine spear meant for Arjuna. As the war approached its final days, all pretense of chivalry vanished. Night combat, forbidden weapons, and betrayals of eerie kind became the new law. What had begun as a righteous endeavor ended as a desperate struggle in which no side could claim purity. Yet even in the heart of slaughter, isolated acts of courage and compassion glimmered, proof that no darkness could wholly snuff out the divine spark. On the 18th day, Arjuna and Karna met at last. The duel eclipsed all others, skill matched for skill, resolve for resolve. When Karna's chariot wheel sank into the earth, a final echo of destiny, he stood defenseless. Remembering every kindness his rival had shown, Arjuna hesitated. But Krishna spoke. "Strike now. It is not you who acts, but Dharma itself." With a final arrow, Arjuna felled the man who had been both enemy and brother. The war was over, but the field was a graveyard, victory hollow as ash. Kurukshetra had tested every principle of justice and honor. What remained was not triumph, but a lesson. That righteousness, if clung to with pride instead of wisdom, could become indistinguishable from the evil it sought to destroy. And yet, in the quiet after the last cry had faded, there was also the seed of renewal. For even this devastation was part of a cosmic cycle that would, in time, give rise to a new age, one built upon the lessons purchased so dearly in blood and tears. With the fate of the war suspended on a single contest, Karna, the son born of a god and yet unknown to his own brothers, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Arjuna, his rival since youth, matched him arrow for arrow, his grief and righteous fury refining his skill to an almost unearthly precision. For long moments it seemed their duel might never end, so perfectly did their strength and training mirror each other, but destiny intervened. As Karna strained to loose a final arrow, his chariot wheel sank into the soft earth, an ancient curse come to collect its due. Bound by the honor of the warrior's code, Arjuna hesitated, but Krishna, steady at his side, reminded him in a voice as inexorable as time that this was not a tournament, but a war already stripped of all illusions of fairness. With a single arrow, Arjuna struck Karna down, and the tide of battle broke. Their greatest champion gone, the Kaurava ranks began to splinter. One by one, the legendary warriors who had carried their banner fell. Shalya, the peerless spearman who took command after Karna's death, was slain by Yudhishthira. Shakuni, the schemer whose dice had set this conflagration alight, was hunted down by Bhima, who had vowed across 13 years of exile that this reckoning would come. At last, only Duryodhana remained. With his armies scattered and his cause in ruins, he challenged Bhima to single combat, a duel of maces amid the wreckage of their shared past. It was not merely a fight, it was the culmination of a lifetime's jealousies, slights, and unhealed wounds. They clashed as dusk fell over Kurukshetra, their blows cracking like thunder over the plain. Neither yielded ground, neither flinched. Hours passed as they hammered each other with inhuman endurance, the weight of generations pressing on every strike. Yet Bhima bore within him the memory of Draupadi dragged by her hair across a Hakin, all of jeering nobles, the shame of injustice unanswered. In a final, desperate stroke, he shattered the rules of honorable combat, striking below the waist. Duryodhana fell, gasping accusations of treachery, but Bhima felt no remorse. He turned and beckoned. From the ranks emerged Draupadi, her hair unbound at last. Kneeling beside her fallen tormentor, she washed her locks in his blood, fulfilling the terrible vow she had carried like an unextinguished flame. With the death of their leader, the last embers of Kaurava resistance guttered out. The victors walked through the wreckage, past the bodies of brothers and friends, and knew no triumph. Kurukshetra was silent save for the cries of carrion birds and the moans of the dying. Victory tasted like ashes. Yet the war's horrors were not over. 3 days later, as the Pandavas and their allies slept in exhausted relief, Ashwathama, son of Drona, slipped into their camp. Consumed by grief for his father, he led a midnight slaughter that left none spared. Servants were murdered in their tents. Loyal soldiers were cut down unarmed. Worst of all, Draupadi's 5 young sons, born of each of her husbands, were butchered in their sleep. When dawn broke, the survivors found a massacre so merciless that even the gods seemed to weep. The Pandavas, who had endured every trial, now faced the unthinkable. Their children gone, slain not in combat but in treachery. In pursuit of Ashwathama, they cornered him as he prepared to unleash a weapon of annihilation that would have consumed the earth itself. Only Vyasa's intervention spared creation, but no death could balance such a crime. Instead, the jewel that had crowned Ashwathama's brow was torn away, and he was condemned to wander the ages, cursed with wounds that would never heal, a living monument to the price of vengeance. Even this bitter justice brought no solace. Draupadi, who had endured more than any woman should, found no comfort in retribution. Her sons remained dead. And then, as if grief needed one last edge, came revelation. Karna, slain by Arjuna's hand, had been their eldest brother all along, abandoned as an infant and raised in obscurity. The knowledge fell upon them like a final mortal blow. What had seemed stubborn enmity in life was, in truth, the loyalty of a man who had chosen gratitude over birthright. In death, Karna stood nobler than any had understood. When Kunti confessed her secret, the brothers could only bow their heads. Even victory could not absolve such sorrow. Gandhari, the mother of the 100 slain sons, came to the battlefield to perform their last rites. Blindfolded for a lifetime in solidarity with her husband, she now moved among the dead with unerring recognition. And when she reached the Pandavas, her grief transformed into a curse that struck to the marrow. "You have destroyed my lineage," she declared, her voice resonant with a mother's implacable rage. "So too shall your descendants perish, your dynasty devoured by fratricide." All who heard her felt the justice of it. Krishna himself accepted the curse, knowing it was the wheel of time turning as it must. His own clan would meet the same fate, a final dissolution that would clear the way for a new age. With the war over, the work of rebuilding began. Yudhishthira was crowned amid ruins and widows, the ceremony solemn as a funeral. The throne he had claimed stood in a land emptied of its noblest blood. Among his first acts was the Ashwamedha sacrifice, a ritual to sanctify his reign. Yet even as the sacred horse wandered across the battered world, no ceremony could cleanse their hearts. The 5 brothers, once united in purpose, now bore the invisible weight of guilt and regret. Draupadi withdrew behind a veil of grief that no vindication could pierce. Their kingdom was restored, but the price was everything, and so the age that began with celestial promise ended in sorrow and ruin. Yet from this ending would rise the seeds of another age, sown with hard-won knowledge of power's true cost and the terrible ambiguity of righteousness. In time, the bones of Kurukshetra would turn to dust, but the lessons of that battlefield would echo in every age to come, reminders that even the most necessary victories can taste bitterest to those who must achieve them. In the silent forests where dawn mist curled around ancient trees like the breath of dreaming titans, the Pandavas began the long exile that had been decreed by loaded dice and hearts blinded by ambition. The world they left behind, the palaces of polished stone, the carved balconies hung with silk banners, the gardens perfumed with night-blooming jasmine, seemed now like a vision half-remembered from another life. Here, beneath a canopy of emerald and shadow, the brothers built their dwelling, no more than a simple shelter of woven reeds and timber, but it stood as a testament to their refusal to be broken. Each day dawned with the cry of peacocks echoing through the tall sal trees, and the measured roar of distant waterfalls that fell from hidden heights into pools of glass-green water. The eldest, Yudhishthira, rose before the sun, his mind already burdened by the memory of that final, shameful wager. Though his brothers assured him again and again that the blame was not his alone to carry, he felt the weight of their exile pressing most heavily on his shoulders. He moved through each hour with a quiet gravity, offering counsel to his siblings and solace to Draupadi, even as his own heart throbbed with regret. Bhima's fury had not abated, and often he would stride into the deeper woods, his massive club slung across his shoulder, seeking out wild boar and fierce jungle cats to test his strength against. Each time he returned with the spoils of the hunt, the others could see in his eyes that no beast, however savage, could quench the fire of his indignation. It was Draupadi's humiliation that haunted him most. When he lay down to sleep on a bed of woven grass, he dreamed of the assembly hall, the echoing laughter, the hand that had pulled at her hair. In those dreams, vengeance was always close enough to taste, but never to seize. Arjuna spent his days training in the glades where shafts of sunlight turned the air to gold. Though he no longer wore the ornaments of a prince, he carried with him the unbroken discipline of a warrior born. With his Gandiva bow, a gift earned through years of penance and devotion, he practiced the arts of archery until his hands were blistered and raw. Sometimes, in the deep hours of night, he would steal away to the riverbank to commune with the spirits that watched over him. There, under the vault of stars, he whispered his doubts and hopes into the darkness, feeling in the stillness a reassurance that though the path ahead was shadowed, it led inevitably toward the fulfillment of destiny. Nakula and Sahadeva, the twins born of divine physicians, set about learning the secrets of the forest. Nakula discovered plants whose leaves soothed fever and roots that drew poison from a wound. Sahadeva read the movements of stars and the hidden language of animals. Together, they tended to their brother's injuries and found ways to preserve food for the lean seasons. In service, they found purpose, though in private moments they too mourned all they had lost. Draupadi carried herself with the same unbending dignity she had shown on that day of shame. Though the forest floor was her carpet and the river her mirror, she never allowed bitterness to twist her spirit. Each morning she gathered flowers to decorate their modest dwelling, and in the evenings she prepared meals with her own hands. She spoke little of Hastinapur, but when she did, her words were laced with iron. "Let them think us defeated," she told her husbands, her voice as calm as the moonlit pools. "It is not palaces or titles that make us who we are. It is the fire that no insult can extinguish." Seasons turned. The rains came in torrents that washed the air clean, then passed into the crisp clarity of winter. In time, the Pandavas grew accustomed to their life in exile. They became hunters and herbalists, woodcutters and students of the sages who wandered the same hidden paths. Yet beneath the surface calm, the memory of what had been taken from them smoldered like coals beneath ash. In the 12th year of exile, rumors began to reach their ears. Travelers who carried news of Hastinapur's growing opulence, of Duryodhana's triumphal processions and lavish feasts. Each tale was a fresh wound. It was said that the Kauravas boasted openly that their cousins would never return, that even if they did, the world would no longer remember their names. At night, Bhima paced the clearing like a caged lion. Arjuna's arrows struck their targets with ever more ferocious precision. Only Yudhishthira remained outwardly calm, though Draupadi sometimes saw him staring into the fire, his jaw clenched. It was then that sages began to arrive, drawn by the Pandavas' reputation for endurance and piety. Some came to offer wisdom, others to remind them that the wheel of fate turned for all men, and that no darkness was eternal. One evening, when the rains had retreated and the air was rich with the scent of damp earth, the sage Markandeya came to their dwelling. His hair was white as mountain snow, and his eyes gleamed with the serenity of one who had seen countless ages pass. Sitting with the brothers beneath a great banyan tree, Markandeya spoke of the cycles of time, of empires that had risen and fallen, of kings who had conquered the world only to lose everything to pride. He told them that in every age, Dharma must be tested and renewed through sacrifice. Remember, he said, his voice soft as the night breeze, that even the longest night must give way to dawn. You are not the first to suffer injustice. You will not be the last. But if you hold fast to righteousness, your names will endure when all else is forgotten. These words kindled a quiet resolve in Yudhishthira's heart. He thanked the sage and offered what little hospitality they could. When Markandeya had gone, the brothers sat in silence, each pondering what dawn might look like for them. In that stillness, Draupadi spoke the thought that none had dared voice. "We were born for more than this," she whispered. "Our trials have purpose, though we cannot yet see it." The moon rose, painting the clearing in silver light. The years of exile had stripped them of wealth, position, and comfort. But in that stripping away, something unbreakable had been revealed. A faith not in fortune or circumstance, but in the quiet certainty that their story was not yet over. Far away, in the glittering halls of Hastinapur, Duryodhana feasted beneath banners of gold. Yet the wheel of destiny turned silently in the darkness, and every revolution brought the Pandavas one step closer to their return. When the 12th year of exile drew to its weary close, Yudhishthira resolved that they should not spend their final season in seclusion alone. It had been decreed that the 13 years must be endured without complaint, but nowhere was it written that they must be wasted in bitterness. And so he spoke one evening as the saffron light of sunset fell across the clearing, painting their worn garments in the glow of embers. "We have known humiliation, hunger, and sorrow," he said, his voice steady. "But the wise have taught us that the heart is a field that must be ploughed if it is to yield wisdom. Let us undertake a pilgrimage to the sacred places of Bharat. Perhaps there we will find counsel, or at least the strength to carry forward." The others agreed, for in truth the walls of their clearing had begun to feel like a prison. Draupadi's eyes brightened at the thought of standing again upon temple stones, of offering prayers in places where generations had sought the grace of the divine. And so, with little more than their weapons and the memories they carried like old wounds, the Pandavas set forth. Their first destination lay to the north, where the Himalayas rose in silent majesty, their snow-laden slopes reflecting the dawn like polished silver. The journey was long and difficult. Paths twisted across gorges where green rivers raged and through forests so dense that sunlight seldom found the ground. Yet as they travelled, a change slowly overtook them. The world outside their grief grew larger with each passing league. They began to glimpse how small even their bitterness seemed beneath the gaze of mountains that had witnessed countless ages. In the high places, they visited the hermitage of Vyasa, their grandsire in spirit, if not in name. He received them with a quiet affection that needed no words. For 3 days they sat in the shade of ancient cedars, while Vyasa spoke of time and the way it unravels all certainty. "You have suffered, yes," he said, "and you will suffer again, but do not mistake your trials for a sign that the world is without order. Like a sculptor's chisel, adversity reveals the hidden shape within." Arjuna asked then, "But if destiny is written, what use is action? What merit is there in striving? And Vyasa smiled, the lines of his face deepening like the folds of a riverbed. Action is the measure of a man, he said. It is through action, rightly undertaken, that Dharma is renewed. If your path was without obstacle, how could your virtue be proven? From Vyasa's hermitage, they continued eastward, where the Ganga flowed broad and serene. Each dawn they bathed in her waters, feeling the chill seep into their bones and cleanse the dust of old grievances. Draupadi knelt on the riverbank, offering flowers cupped in her palms, and whispered prayers for the children she had not yet born and the justice she had not yet seen. Her tears mingled with the sacred current, and in that mingling she felt her spirit lightened, if only a little. In Varanasi they offered gifts at shrines older than memory, where black stone lingams gleamed with oil and the air was thick with incense and the chanting of 1,000 supplicants. Yudhishthira spent long hours in meditation before a flickering lamp, searching the dark corridors of his heart for the last remnants of pride. Bhima wrestled with the priest's strongmen in friendly contests that left the crowds roaring with delight, though even victory could not soften the lines of anger carved into his brow. One evening, as the city settled into the hush before dawn, Arjuna slipped away to the steps that descended to the river's edge. There he strung his bow and practiced in silence. Each arrow flew true, vanishing into the fog. He did not aim at any target the eye could see. Instead, he aimed at the confusion and sorrow that clouded his mind. When he had emptied his quiver, he knelt and pressed his forehead to the stone, asking the river to carry away what he could not. The pilgrimage led them next to the southern lands, where temples rose like jeweled crowns above fields of ripening grain. In Madurai, they walked among pillars carved with stories so old no one alive could recite them in full. Nakula and Sahadeva marveled at the knowledge preserved there, treatises on healing and astronomy, scrolls describing the movements of stars and the secret properties of roots and flowers. Each evening, they sat together and spoke in hushed voices of the wonders they would bring to their kingdom when it was restored. In Kanchipuram, Draupadi dreamed that a woman robed in blue and crowned with lotuses took her hand and whispered, "Your sorrow will not last forever." When she awoke, she felt a fragile peace blooming in the hollow place behind her ribs. She told no one of the dream, but in her heart she carried it like a hidden flame against the cold. At last, their journey brought them westward to Dwaraka, where the sea broke in thunder against the walls of Krishna's city. The Dark Prince welcomed them as kin, his gaze clear and without reproach. In his presence, they felt their burdens grow lighter, as though his laughter could dissolve the chains of fate itself. He walked with them along the white beaches, speaking of Dharma and the cycles of time that neither king nor beggar can escape. "Remember this," he told them, as the sun sank in a sheet of molten gold. "No struggle is wasted if it is undertaken with a pure heart. When you return to Hastinapur, and you will, remember that vengeance alone cannot build a kingdom worth ruling." As the tides whispered at their feet, Arjuna looked at Krishna and said, "You speak as if you know all that will come to pass." And Krishna smiled, the setting sun painting his face in shades of fire and shadow. "Perhaps I do," he said, "but it is not my place to carry your destiny. That honor and that burden belongs to you." With hearts strengthened by the counsel of sages and the blessings of countless shrines, the Pandavas turned north again, knowing that the final year of exile awaited them. They had traversed half the world, seeking wisdom in every hidden corner. Yet as they drew near to the familiar forests where their exile had begun, each felt in his heart that the greatest tests still lay ahead. That night, as they camped beneath a sky bright with 1,000,000 stars, Draupadi rose and walked alone to the edge of the clearing. She looked back at the sleeping forms of her husbands, and then up into the dark, infinite heavens. "Let this be enough," she whispered. let the gods see that we have not turned away from the path." No voice answered her. No vision split the night, but in the quiet she felt something shift like the first stirring of wind before a storm, and she knew, as surely as she knew her own name, that the season of wandering was ending. The time of reckoning was drawing near. With the war ended and the last rites performed, the 5 brothers stood at the edge of a world they had saved, but at a cost none had foreseen. Kurukshetra lay behind them like an open wound in the heart of Bharat. The once flourishing kingdoms had been reduced to smouldering ruins, their people scattered, their treasures spent. As the survivors gathered in the desolate capital, an uneasy quiet settled over the land, a hush born not of peace but of exhaustion. Yudhishthira, now emperor by right and destiny, felt the crown upon his brow as a burden rather than an honor. He knew no coronation song could drown out the cries of widows or erase the knowledge that his victory was paid for in the lives of countless innocents. Each of the brothers struggled with their own reckoning. Bhima, whose strength had crushed so many enemies, now spent his nights remembering the faces of those he had slain, not as faceless opponents, but as men, each with mothers, wives, and children. Arjuna, who had once stood on the field paralyzed by compassion, found no solace in triumph. His greatest rival had been his brother, his greatest test, the weight of survival itself. Nakula and Sahadeva, the twins, watched the ruined cities and wondered whether any future could be built upon such devastation. And Draupadi, whose dignity had lit their path through every darkness, walked among the women who had lost everything. Though she was now queen of all Bharat, her gaze remained lowered, as if searching for the children she could never again hold in her arms. Krishna, who had guided them through every trial, gathered them one last time in the quiet halls of Hastinapur. His voice, calm as the ocean before dawn, reminded them, "You have fulfilled your Dharma. You have restored balance. But remember, justice bought with ruin is never complete. If your hearts remain clouded by guilt, know this, even God's Mu sometimes break the world to save it." His counsel, though wise, could not mend what had been broken. In time, as the realm began to heal, Yudhishthira resolved to perform one final rite, the Ashwamedha Yajna, to sanctify his rule and atone for the war's calamity. A white horse, marked with sacred signs, was set free to wander the lands, followed by warriors to challenge any who disputed the emperor's sovereignty. For a full year, the horse roamed unchallenged, a testament to the exhaustion that gripped every kingdom. None wished to contest the authority of men who had survived the greatest war in history. And so the sacrifice was completed, the final offerings were made, the embers of the old age cooled to ash. When the ceremonies ended, Krishna prepared for his own departure. He gathered the Pandavas and spoke with the gravity of a closing era. "My time among you ends. The age we have shared will pass into memory, but the lessons you have learned will remain." Then he smiled, an expression filled with infinite sorrow and infinite compassion. All things return to the source. All victories dissolve. Only Dharma endures. When Krishna departed this earth, it was as if the last lamp of that age flickered out. The darkness that followed was not of evil, but of a world left to find its way without the touch of divinity. The Pandavas, their task fulfilled, began to feel the weariness of lives that had carried too many burdens. In time, Yudhishthira placed the crown in Parikshit's hands, the grandson born after the war, and turned his face toward the mountains. One by one, the 5 brothers and Draupadi cast aside their royal garments. Barefoot, clothed only in simple robes, they walked away from the palace they had fought so long to reclaim. They ascended the Himalayas, step by step, leaving behind the cities and the people and the long shadow of Kurukshetra. It is said the Sim and Shed And as each of them fell to the cold, white silence, Yudhishthira alone continued, his heart unwavering, his purpose unbroken. At last, he reached the summit where heaven touched earth. There, the gods welcomed him, for he had been tested as no king had ever been tested, and found worthy. And so ended the story of the Pandavas, heroes born of gods and mortals, forged in the crucible of war, tempered by sacrifice. Their deeds would echo through the corridors of time, whispered from one generation to the next, that righteousness is never simple, that victory is never pure, that even the noblest cause demands a price no soul can pay without sorrow. Long after the last bones had turned to dust and the last temples had crumbled, the field of Kurukshetra remained, a silent testament to an age when gods walked among men, when the world was remade in fire and tears,